You're entering the Pat Mayo Experience.
Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by DraftKings. Week 13 DraftKings picks and preview, building some lineups, talking about the chalk and ownership and all that fun stuff. You out there need to play in the Pat Mayo Experience Listeners League. We need to get it filled up. I think there's like 1,500 spots available. We are doing this show a day early, so obviously it's a bit more open than it would be on a Friday. But that link is down in the description right now. If you want to use an optimizer or The Sims to build your lineups this week, runthesims.com. Code Mayo will get you 10% off. Tambo is on the line. It's been 2 weeks since we've talked. I did have a very good week with Meanie last week in terms of how my Jalen Hurts lineups ended up going. But how have things been going for you? We haven't talked since King of the Beach.
Yeah, King of the Beach, disappointing. We did some giveaways. We still have some more to do, by the way. Keep that in mind. We'll work that out this afternoon or whenever you're done traveling, whatever we can get that done. We've got $200, $100 and $100 to give away to those that left a review for this pod, and then also have another $100 to give away, Pat. So we'll work that out. Wasn't the best finish, but grateful to be there, see some good people, meet them. Doesn't always go your way. Play to win. Last week, I saw you had a great week. That's awesome. Mine was good until it wasn't. I needed that Gabe Davis touchdown at the end of the game to end the slate. That would have been an FFWC seat and a chance at live final redemption, but we still got time. So we'll get back there. This should be a fun one to talk through. We got a slate that's built just for you, with Bryce Young at $4,900. So we'll see how much you want to avoid that when we get there.
Bryce Young broke my heart. I don't know if I can go back and do that all over again. But I think the big thing to talk about this week, Jonathan Taylor is going to be out seemingly at least 2 weeks, having thumb surgery. Zack Moss vaulted back into being a starter. But here's the thing. He's $4,600 this week on DraftKings. I'm looking at the Run the Sims optimals right now. The current projected ownership, and obviously this is going to change greatly over time, like the next 3 days once we get some more information in the finalized injury report. But 47% ownership is the projection right now. I'm only going to guess that's going to get higher as the week goes along. But here's the crazy thing. Yes, he is negative optimal leverage, but he does appear in the optimal lineup after 10,000 simulations 41% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't see that very often, but in this case, it's warranted. Obviously, you got to think about the position. Obviously, the guy was in there. The funniest part of it all, Pat, I don't know if you remember this or recall, but it was the week against Tennessee after everyone had been jamming the chalk against the Titans forever, that Jonathan Taylor came back that week, and everyone's like, oh, there's no way, Zack Moss does anything here, and no one plays him. And Zack Moss just smashes these guys after the chalk had failed against them so many times. Now he's 4,600. Now there's no JT. We know how this ends, I think. But like you said, it makes sense for reasons. $4,600. I think a lot of people will just consider locking him at this price. I think there's ways that you can also leverage him on top of this.
Well, let's get into that right now and try to figure that out. Do we want to lock him in? Is that the move?
I don't.
Okay.
No, I think you can just play him according to the ownership. Like if you want, I definitely think there's going to be people that just say, forget it. I'm just going to play him at the field level. He's around 45% owned. Let me get somewhere in the range of 40 to 50%. And then the other portion of my portfolio, let's do things a bit differently. What might that look like? I don't think Henry's going to get as much ownership as he should. He's still going to get ownership because look, he's coming off a good week and this is the good spot. He picks it up. They're at home. So I don't mind Henry. I think also playing Zack Moss with Minshew can work. So I don't know if as many people will do that and get the stack going like a Minshew, Moss, Pittman, or Downs. And then I think just fully leveraging off him completely and going with Minshew, Pittman, Downs. We tried it last week. This would definitely be a spot to do it here. And you could just go those three with Henry on the opposite side. I actually really like that stack early in the week, starting things off here with you.
I won some money with Derrick Henry last week. There's zero chance after watching that game that he will be in my lineups this week. He was terrible against Carolina.
Yeah, did just fine, I thought, but
he did do just fine fantasy wise. I mean, he scored 2 touchdowns and only had 20 points. Like that's not exactly crushing it, considering there's Alvin Kamara might have 20 catches this week, so there's that.
I think
side
it's
of it
slate
too.
Dependent though. That's what I'm saying though. Like you just said it there. That's what it matters, right? Slate dependent. Last week we had no idea there was so many more unknowns. I guess that to your point, if you have guys you feel much more comfortable this week, then it's easier to avoid that spot. But as far as in regards to the Zack Moss situation, I think it is a bigger conversation around that because obviously most people that have Zack Moss won't have Henry. Not a lot of people play backs against each other. Some will, but most don't.
Well, let's talk about the running backs then, because obviously it's going to be Moss, and he's going to be probably in half of lineups, or probably even more than that by the time that Sunday ends up rolling around. Again, this is just for main slate stuff. So again, hit the description, get in the listeners league, and for all of the updates on all of this, because again, we're doing this a day early, Tambo and Hoop are going to be live at 9:45 a.m. Eastern time Sunday morning, live on Mayo Media Network to refresh everything, the updated ownership, the updated builds, and if you do have questions, that's the time to go and ask those questions to the good folks at shipitnation.com. Shipitnation.com code Mayo does get you 10% off all packages at ShipItNation. So watch the show. If you like what they have to say, you might want to become a member at shipitnation.com. And code Mayo can help you out with that. McCaffrey and Rashad White are, 2 and 3 in terms of ownership right now. That is like Javonte Williams, Kyron Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Alvin Kamara, Bijan, Breece Hall. So when I'm thinking about it, like in terms of points per dollar, like you mentioned Derrick Henry. Like Derrick Henry's okay. He's not for me this week. I think if I was going to roll the dice in that same sort of price range, I'd probably end up going like a cheaper Ramondre. I'd probably, everyone is on the San Francisco side of this Eagles-San Francisco game that maybe just take DeAndre Swift and hope that works out, because I just don't know. I feel like, actually, I don't even say that I don't know what I'm getting from Derrick Henry, but he looks slow. It may be because it's D. Hember all of a sudden. He turns the gear. But it was alarming how little burst he had against the worst run defense in football last week.
Yeah, I see it from that perspective too. I guess that's the thing. The touchdowns can end up mattering. And on this slate, you kind of can look at it from the perspective you said, but it's more of the Moss situation, because here's the deal. You said it off the top with the Christian McCaffrey part there. Moss equals Christian McCaffrey in a lot of lineups, because that's just the stars and scrubs of it, right? You've got the money savings with Moss. It's not like there's a bunch of super expensive stacks on the slate. I know we're going to talk about Tua Tyreek, but again, you know how spread the ownership gets at quarterback. So once that happens, you are easily able to fit in Christian McCaffrey. So just thinking from that perspective, there's something to be said for those balanced builds, whether it's a Rashad White and a Ramondre Stevenson with Zack Moss, or just those two and leave Moss out and go to someone like Downs in the wide receiver position to leverage it that way. I just think there's other ways to use it. What's your take on the other guys that are just below Derrick Henry, then Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson in those spots, both 6,700?
I like Gibbs a lot, but I'm just looking at the projected ownerships right now. Gibbs and David Montgomery are both in a similar spot, 6,700 and 6,500, whereas I'm seeing Jahmyr Gibbs at 14% ownership. That might be a bit high when all is said and done, but Montgomery coming in at 2%. I think I'd just roll the die. I think Gibbs' upside is probably better than Montgomery's, but I don't think it's 7 times more likely to hit than David Montgomery's. It just feels like no one is using Montgomery, and we'll see what happens with Raheem Mostert as well. Like, we'll get the A-Chain news on Friday, whether or not he's playing, and then on Wednesday, Mostert doesn't practice, but that's been kind of a thing that's been happening throughout the course of the past few weeks. I think that he is going to play, but if we don't get A-Chain, I'm just going to jam Mostert instead.
Yeah, that's a good way to get some access to that game. Obviously, the big total there in Miami, Washington. Mind you, it did come down some since opening. I think it opened closer to 51, and now I'm seeing like 49.5 in some places. So I'm interesting there. But like you said, the Mostert stuff is usually just the rest that he gets. Achane was last week. They actually said, McDaniel, again, don't know how much you can trust him. Last week was coach speak week, though. All the guys that the coaches talked about seemingly got there, and Bijan, Henry, Kieran Williams, all those guys. But he did say that Achane was fine. It was just more precautionary, and now he was back limited again at Wednesday this week too. So maybe he could be back in the mix. We'll have to see. Montgomery was limited on Wednesday. I expect him to be in, but I think that's the other thing people are looking at here, Pat. This matchup usually worse for running backs, but you can see a guy like Gibbs who's a running back, plus, because he can get. We've seen him even in big blowouts like that Ravens game. He almost got 30 points, and they lost 40-6. Or whatever. They can just start checking it down to him like crazy. He's explosive with the ball in hand. So I don't hate your call there on that. Bijan, I'm not sure if people are going to think it's chasing or not, but realistically, that would be the spot to go up against versus trying to go through the air against the Jets. So that's why I kind of brought those two guys up. But I think Rashad White is going to be the guy that people go to here at the $6,300 price point.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Like, why wouldn't you go to Rashad White? He cracked 100 yards for the first time all season on the ground. Although when you brought up Bryce Young initially, I started racking my brain being like, what else can we do in this game? Like, what about just using Baker on the other side?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And we'll see, like I said, where the White ownership gets to. Sometimes that's a fun way to do it as well. You could just leverage it up there, go with the Baker side of things. And then I don't know what your thoughts are on Adam Thielen when we get there. I know we're talking running backs, but he's 6,600. He's back into a price range you could kind of get behind. And I know his game log is ugly, but it was either in the tidbits last week or it just missed. But it's actually been the schemes and everything that he's been going up against that he's been doing horrible. And all the games at the start of the season are kind of like what he's going to see this week. So it could be a better spot for him at 6,600.
And here's the problem with Thielen, because one, he is on the downturn, and it could be the defenses, or it could be that just this entire offense is completely inept. And now you have a new coaching staff coming in, so maybe their priorities change on who they want to highlight, because they have one win, they're not going anywhere. Obviously, they want to win games because they don't have their first round draft pick, but instead of force feeding Thielen like they had been earlier on in the season, maybe this is the time to force feed Mingo to see what you have there. Maybe use some Terrace Marshall, Tommy Tremble, and all these other losers that are on the team. It's too expensive to roll the dice on that for what I now perceive as very little upside. Like when he was getting 14 targets a game, that was great. He could overcome all of this, but they have one touchdown outside of the 20-yard line so far this season. Like his overall upside in terms of like breaking a big one is just non-existent. Like you almost need him to have that 9 catch for 100 yards and a touchdown just to kind of get there for you, or just pray he scores 2 touchdowns, which in this offense, not great.
Yeah, that is true. And the point you made is actually really good. I don't think enough people look at that. Again, it comes from the I know ball crew more than the sim side of things, but just in general, sometimes that is the case, right? People wonder, why is this guy all of a sudden getting involved? They never used him all season. That's the whole point. It's later in the season. Now they're trying to find out what they got. But my counterpoint to that, at least with Carolina, I guess, would be they fired their coach. Like everyone said, like, why would you do this now? You could just leave what you had. It's already a dumpster fire. Just let it play out. Wouldn't you? I would think more in that scenario, it would be to just leave them and see what you got with everybody else and switch up the game plan versus now swapping these. Not like they're going to go and try and win a bunch of games. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying what maybe goes back to what works. And against this type of setup, I think it could be an option. I think Thielen at 6,600 is at least somewhat interesting. I don't hate the Mingo call either. But one last thing I wanted to ask you too, the Pittsburgh backs. I wanted to talk to you about this real quick because I know Warren popped up in the optimal. Did you see the stat yesterday about Najee Harris? He's got the most 15-plus yard runs of any running back in the entire NFL.
I did see that. Najee won me some nice money last week. He was, I smashed his over 47.5 rushing yards. And this is what the kids call a smash spot against the Arizona Cardinals. Like play your running backs against the Cardinals and Bengals, and you should be pretty good to go. Unfortunately, we don't get the Bengals on the main slate this week to try to take advantage of this again. But I think this is a very critical range of pricing this week for filling out your roster, especially at running back, depending on which stacks that you end up going with, because you have Ford, who the Sims really like as well. Ford and Warren are the two guys in that range that are being spit out as like, oh, they're really good plays, points per dollar plays. Ford's 55, Chuba Hubbard is 53. We still don't know what's going on at quarterback for the Browns and what that split is going to look like between Ford and Kareem Hunt. And I did see that they cut Kenyon Drake from their practice squad and re-signed someone who doesn't matter, I suppose. But Ford was in on 80% of the routes run last week. So if we end up getting Flacco in this game, I think that where he's not going to run, like DTR is going to run a little bit. We know that Watson was going to run a little bit. We know that PJ Walker is going to run a little bit. I can almost assure you that Joe Flacco not running at all, that maybe there's just more in lines of checkdowns, because this was always my problem. And when you start to go back and correlate it, when you see DeAndre Swift's numbers or Gainwell's numbers go up in the Eagles offense, it was almost directly tied to Jalen Hurts' knee contusion and him not being able to run anymore, that he had to dump the ball off. And now we see it against the Bills last week. His knee is fine. He's back to running double-digit times again. And I think it's sort of the inverse this time with Cleveland, where all of a sudden we knew that Ford was the primary pass catching back earlier on in the season after Nick Chubb ended up going out, but those targets never materialized really into anything because they just weren't dumping the ball off. All three of their quarterbacks were just taking off and running, where dump offs would normally be the play in that, but obviously running with the quarterback to just take the ball out of the air, keep the ball on the ground, keep the clock moving. You have a great defense. Makes a ton of sense. With Flacco, he might just dump this off to Jerome Ford 6 times in this game.
Or more, actually. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And also, too, note, Kareem Hunt still doesn't practice. I know it's only Thursday this week. We're doing it a day early, but no practice and groin injury. I mean, that's something you have to keep an eye on. So at 5,500, Jerome Ford could become very interesting. Obviously, the ownership would come with that if things, go differently and all that. But either way, Pat, there's enough running backs now, just talking through it with you, that, man, there's like a pool of 8 to 10 you could make a case for here. So we have a lot of running backs to work through. And I said this on the first look show I did with Degenerate 75 with James there. And man, it feels like one of those weeks where we've been waiting for it, where it feels like all the chalk could be good. And then it ends up being one of those weeks where all the chalk is finally bad. And then you end up just needing to mix some of these other plays in. So we'll have to wait and see how the ownership shakes out. But in the case just of running back, we actually talked through like 8 to 10 options here that I feel comfortable. If they landed in my lineup, I wouldn't be like, I don't really love him. We talked through a good number of options that you can use.
Because in this $5,000 range, Javonte Williams is the one sucking up all the oxygen because you have a lot of split situations. Like even Devin Singletary is now overpriced because he's $5,900. And we saw last week, yes, he played way more than Dameon Pierce, but they were pretty close in touches. And I just think that the Texans are going to continue to throw in this spot. Then you have Jaylen Warren versus Najee Harris, with Warren being more expensive by $200, yet being like double the amount of ownership. I'd probably just go back to Najee in this spot if I was going to use one of them, to be perfectly honest with you.
It's cheaper. It saves you a couple $100. I think that was why I brought it up a little bit, just to say it's interesting, because he only went up from 4,900. So you could definitely go back to him there. I like your call at least off the Javonte Williams stuff. There's a lot of other options there. I liked your Ramondre Stevenson. You mentioned him earlier. He was another guy. He's just up above, but then way down below those other $6,800 to $6,700 guys. And I was looking him up yesterday. 21 and 20 attempts, the last two. But if you want to really look at the other side of it, look all his games, 5, 5, 6, 4, 6, 6 for targets. He's been a lot more involved than people think. And now you're starting to see some opportunity for him. So, and matchup wise, that it could be good. So again, he'll get a little bit of ownership, but maybe if it's in that 10% range, plenty of opportunity to get leverage on a guy like him as well.
Wide receivers in terms of ownership, Tyreek leading the charge. Then it's Pittman, Demario Douglas, who may or may not play in this game. He was placed into concussion protocol. I'm going to guess that he doesn't go against the Chargers, which means like 38 catches for 4 yards for Juju, which, good PPR day. Jalen Waddle is popping up, so it does seem like that Tua stack is going to be the one that if you can afford it. And with Zack Moss, I mean, you mentioned that Zack Moss equals Christian McCaffrey. It might also equal Dolphin stack too.
Yes, it definitely does. I mean, that helps pop that up, because that's how you get the affordability to Tyreek Hill. So it's possible that's the other angle of it. Like, say, you're going to see mixes of both. But what I was really saying is more of like the stars and scrubs approach, where you get a guy like him in cheap. If you get, let's say, Juju, the optimal pretty much told it, Pat. It just didn't have the CMC version of it, right? It has Tyreek instead.
Yeah, then you have like Cortland Sutton, Nico Collins, Pickens, Tank Dell, DeAndre Hopkins, Josh Downs, Elijah Moore picking up a little bit. He's sort of the cheap option that I think that people are going to go to here, just because the projections are going to really like him this week. Points per dollar wise, he's third on the board. It's Juju, then Tyreek Hill, then Elijah Moore, then Curtis Samuel, then A.T. Perry. So we don't know what's going on, and we're probably not going to know what's going on with the Saints receivers until we get a lot closer to game time. But it does seem like Olave has a much better chance of playing than Shaheed does. Obviously, no Michael Thomas, so A.T. Perry is going to be a part of the starting receiving core. Taysom Hill is going to be out there. I'm very interested in this game. I kind of made the proclamation when I did the show with James on Sunday night that we're going to get a Derek Carr 6-touchdown game at some point the rest of the season. He's just too close every game to finish with 0 touchdowns. And I know that regression doesn't actually work that way, but we've just seen too many instances of it that, it's 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 5 touchdowns for Derek Carr. Like everything just breaks their way one of these games. And with what I've been seeing from the Detroit defense over the past month, that it could be this game if he has the options. So I think that there is value to be mined from somewhere on the Saints offense. I just got to figure out where it is. Maybe it is A.T. Perry at $3,300.
That's what the issue is. Definitely not going to compare him in comparison to skill level of Patrick Mahomes, but in talking about stacking in DFS on main slates, oftentimes I'll be on the show sitting there with you next to you saying, never Mahomes. I preached it again last week. It's just not because it's not a personal thing. It's an excellent quarterback. And I'm not comparing Derek Carr to his skill level. It's when you're talking about stacking in DFS. I feel like, Pat, you'd have to commit a lot of, even let's say you've got a 150 lineup portfolio, you got to get a lot of lineups after this, because you're trying to find so many different combinations, and they're running trick plays to flick it back to Taysom Hill, who's now throwing it, or Kamara's throwing a touchdown to Taysom Hill. They're doing crazy stuff there. So I get it. I like this game in the dome. I also said that to James. I said, what do they say about Goff? He's good in a dome at home, but he's normally just good in a dome, and now we get it on the road. So there's definitely potential here for a back and forth. I feel like I'm going to be having to try and pick it up on mini stacks and secondary stacks as opposed to game stacks, just because I don't know enough spots where to go. I would actually go to the Detroit side and then just try and get Kamara or something like that in on the other side. I think Taysom Hill as a one-off. I know you liked this a couple weeks ago. Always a possibility, just the way they've been using them, if more of these guys are out. But I think, like you said, it's going to be a chance it's Olave in and just Shaheed as the only guy that ends up being out there.
Well, if Olave's in, I feel like he's got to be a must-play.
Yeah, I think people said that last week.
And he was, until he got a concussion. He had over 100 yards in the first half.
Yeah, it's fine. I think I would still lean to the guys above him. Like there's a lot of options up there. Like I like Pittman, Tank Dell, Jalen Waddle. I think all those guys, if you go back to your Baker thought, Mike Evans just coming off a huge game there as well. Like there's a lot of guys that are just above him. And then even below him, Nico Collins, I mentioned the Thielen stuff I'm okay with. I don't know. I don't have high love for Olave. People have all season long, so that's fine. But it hasn't cost me very much. I can tell you that much.
I would play him with Derek Carr if I was going to play Olave. Like those would be
for
my
sure, yeah.
And maybe even then you start getting into the Taysom Hill questions. Like I don't know if you can ever play Taysom Hill as a part of a Saints stack. It's either you play Taysom Hill or you play the other guys.
Feels more like that. Yes, that's the challenge of it all, and that's why like what he's most likely to eat into is the lunch of Kamara and Carr as opposed to being involved with them. And then like I said, but then they just do wacky shit and he is involved. So it's really hard to peg. Carr is 5,600. I get it. That's where the Mahomes thing comes back in. People always say, oh, well, Mahomes is easy. You just pair him with, if you can't figure it out, just make it simple. Pair him with Kelsey and move on. That doesn't always work out. Then it's just these wild dudes catching touchdowns and being involved. So here, Carr, Olave, and shut it down maybe, and then just be comfortable knowing that if it's Perry or Johnson or somebody else like that who gets involved, you didn't have them in your stack, but you also didn't complicate your stack, and you could still pick up those points via Carr. And how many people actually have the Carr, Olave, Terry? That's going to hurt you is my point. And you can mix some of those in too, but I think that's just, if you're going there, Pat, that's how I think you have to do it. Look at it.
Well, if there's no Olave, what do you think that does to the ownership of Perry? Because obviously you have Moss as the pay down option, but Perry becomes a pretty appealing pay down option at receiver too, just to punt that spot off to pay up at the other positions.
Yeah, that's fine. I actually think it's better then, because then I'm assuming the conversation is around Shaheed and Olave being out. Then you're like, okay, it's just naturally a spot. He's $100 more than Juju. If you do think that Pop Douglas is going to be out, then maybe it's a spot where people are on Juju and he's more of like a safe play versus Perry. You know, people saw it last game, like, I can't believe it. This guy's Shaheed's out, Olave's out, Jawan Johnson's out, and I still can't get Perry going here. This would be a spot where you could hop back to him at 3,300, take a shot, and then it would actually make the Carr stuff more interesting, back to my previous point, where at least then it would be even more condensed, right? Then you know it's Carr, Perry, and then you could even chuck Kamara in there because he just becomes like their wide receiver. And if Taysom bites you, maybe you have him in some other lineups as leverage, but you see how it makes that situation less murky and more eligible to use in DFS.
Tight ends, in terms of ownership, Kittle, Njoku, who hasn't been practicing, but it looks like he's going to play. Kittle, Njoku, Logan Thomas, Trey McBride, who also missed practice on Wednesday, so keep an eye on him. Dalton Schultz isn't practicing, so you got to keep an eye on him and update his injury report, but those seem to be the four. Then it's like Laporta, Pitts, Freiermuth. That was the guy who won me all the money last week, by the way, was Freiermuth.
Yeah, he was awesome. 2,900 on DraftKings.
It was the only it led the show. It's funny because I always put the little clip at the beginning of the show, and I was just talking about, just play Freiermuth at 2,900. Maybe he'll be fine. And I was like, if Tambo was here, he would just yell at me for playing terrible lineups, and that was the lineup that won.
It's fine. I mean, one thing I didn't think enough about too was with Canada getting fired, and maybe it's a spot to go back to. He had 1 week to get healthy. I know he didn't do anything, but that's where the game log watchers always lose out. Oh, he sucks. He didn't do anything the first week coming back from injury. And then the next week he goes off. So don't hate it. He was extremely cheap on both sides. He made a lot work. And again, you could play him with Najee or Warren last week, who people had interest in, but there was interest in those running backs, more Warren, I would say. There was interest in Deontay last week, Deontay Johnson. And then the late coach speak was, we're going to get Warren and Pickens more involved, neither of which happened really. I mean, Warren a little bit for sure, obviously, but Pickens not so much. And then it ended up just being Freiermuth, who you needed. So I think there was something to that. What are you seeing on Goddard, though? Because the Schultz and McBride ones are both, it's hamstring and groin related with no practice So that one's like, again, we definitely got to keep an eye on that. But what are you seeing on Goddard? Because he could be a spot to come back at 4,800 as well, right?
Yeah, he might play. He's pushing to play this week. I don't know if I want to play a guy with a broken arm. That's just my take on it.
How does he play then? That's what I never
don't
get.
know. I don't know.
It's wild to me. All the talk yesterday, I'm sure you saw it, about the Twitter doctors and everything with Aaron Rodgers and coming back from Achilles and already within the 21-day window, and will he take a snap or won't he? This is the weird stuff about it, but the one thing that I don't love, at least to just get it back on track here, is George Kittle at the top, at that higher ownership. I usually like him when he's a bit lower owned, and so all I was thinking about is if somehow Goddard if we get some word on it and he is fine, he's way cheaper than Kittle on the opposite side at the same position in the same game, I would have more interest, I think, in taking a risk there. But it is weird, like you said, that he's coming back from a broken arm or whatever it was.
I think that the reason I ended up on Freiermuth last week wasn't because I like Pat Freiermuth. It's because he was $2,100. And when I was filling out lineups, I needed to save $300. So it moved Cade Otton into Freiermuth. I was like, well, I'll live and die by Freiermuth here. Like, that's fine. If he does nothing, he's $2,900. How much was he supposed to do anyway? This week, looking at it now, Cade Otton at $3,200 is just a really nice play.
It's a circle of life, man. We go right back to it. So yeah, that is kind of interesting. And you're selling yourself on even more Baker, right? You got to be thinking of it from that perspective. Well, White is getting the ownership at running back. Go ahead.
J.C. Horn is back this week as well. So I don't know what that means for Mike Evans in terms of, is J.C. Horn going to shadow him? Because he is one of the better corners in the NFL. That maybe that just opens up where when Baker, especially in the red zone, like even watching it last week, that Mike Evans just gets wide open. And Baker's like, oh yeah, I'll throw to that guy. He's standing there wide open. I just don't know if that's going to be the case for Mike Evans this week. He might have a little bit more pushback, which then kind of shifts a second look to Otton, where those just didn't exist a week ago.
And could happen in the end zone, red zone. That's that sort of thing too, where it becomes very valuable. Also, the game log watchers will hate to see Chris Godwin, but man, the targets have still been there. 7, 7, 6, 6, 12, 11, 7. Like he's still been capable. And at 6,300, it's quite the drop to go down to him from going up. What was Evans moved up to now? Evans is 7,700. So big difference there. Almost like the Freiermuth gap that you talk about. 2,900 goes right up to 4,300 there. So I don't mind the Otton play. I think he's fine. I actually had him tagged here. I like him right at the top at 3,200. For some reason, doesn't seem like the ownership is popping to him like you would think. But I also think too, Pat, you can do the old, we've seen this plenty of times, like the Rashad White ownership is there, but not as much as some other spots in general, but just use him and Otton. And you don't necessarily have to have Baker in that case, right? You could just play those two guys as like a cheap combo play, and it can work as well. We've definitely seen it this season.
At defense, everyone is using the Falcons. A quarter of the field or more will use the Falcons this week.
Might be the first time this season to really just hop off that. I know some of the times these chalk defenses have got there this year, but there's also been misses. I just think for me, again, there's a lot of options, and they're also up there, right? I mean, this slate only gets up to 4K. It's not like there's a bunch of appetizing options up there. Maybe the Miami defense or the Pittsburgh defense, you can make a case. Tampa Bay, probably, but even just going the opposite side here at much lower ownership to go to the Jets seems like an option here.
I agree, especially when they have Ritter, who actively tries to give the other team the ball.
Yeah, throwing touchdowns to the opposite side usually helps the defense case. So yeah, and the Jets are a very good defense still, regardless of what people want to make fun of them for. Everything else, it's definitely a fine spot. I don't hate that. I wonder how this trend actually goes as the week goes on, but at least for right now, definitely see the same thing you do with Atlanta popping up to the top.
And if you can find the $200, I think it would be worth it. Not to say that the Bucs D is going to be unowned, but they're $200 more than Atlanta. And I actually like their spot better, mainly because Bryce Young throws a lot of touchdowns to the other team. Whereas I don't know how much, listen, Miami was able to pile up some points pretty early. And then obviously the pick six Hail Mary play at the end of the half really kind of skews what Miami's defense does. But the problem with the Jets and the Falcons is just there's going to be a lot of running in that game. That doesn't facilitate a ton of fantasy points. Whereas if the Bucs can get up against Carolina, they're going to chuck. And the more you can get Bryce Young to chuck, the better it is for your defense.
Yeah, what about any of the cheap options too down at the bottom? Because all the conversation this week seemingly is around that mid-range 3K spot. There's, 2,800 and down. There's a few options here, like Philly against San Francisco.
I would say the best options that you're going to get, Patriots against the Chargers, just because Herbert turns the ball over. Maybe they have like one good option on offense. Take that away. We'll see what happens with that. The Broncos against Houston is iffy, but just in a higher, it's funny because I actually like to target the higher scoring games in some of these situations with the cheap defenses that maybe Stroud just throws a pick six and then he has to keep chucking the entire time. Like, that's good enough for me. Saints against Detroit, Goff has looked bad the past 2 weeks. That we've seen New Orleans defense continue to be pretty good, although Lattimore's probably not going to play. Tennessee against Indy, like anytime that you can just get an unowned defense against Gardner Minshew, like once every 6 weeks, Minshew just melts down. Maybe this is the week.
Two that I like were that reason. The leverage plays down here is Tennessee for sure. You're going up against a 46% Zack Moss on top of the Minshew leverage stacks and things like that. Like, it's just a spot you could see, and that does tie into my Derrick Henry play. I know you didn't love it, but I don't mind putting those together. The Derrick Henry stat, the D Hember thing, actually started. It made the tidbits last week. It's after Thanksgiving when he picks it up. But the other stat that everyone knows that one, the other stat that went with it that I thought was so valuable was also it's all based on them being in the game and being up, which seems like common knowledge, but has been more factual with him than ever. So if somehow you can flip it, it almost makes sense to pair the two together because Derrick Henry is likely only having a big game if they're leading or ahead, which likely means we've got Gardner Minshew chucking, which would make sense to put it with the Tennessee defense. And then Carolina, similar reasons. I know we talked a lot about Baker, but if somehow, again, we know Rachaad White is at least getting some ownership there, that would be a way to leverage up on that. And then if Baker stuff or Cade Otton stuff or any of that picks up steam, you'd have Carolina against Baker as well, who can definitely make mistakes of his own.
I was surprised after all the discourse last week about how much Derek Carr sucks. I talked about how Derek Carr might be a good play. That doesn't mean I'm right. I'm wrong all the time. But to look at not necessarily the pay down D, but if everyone's going to be in this $3,400 to $3,800 range, that's what the ownership is showing right now. At defense, the Lions at $3K against New Orleans that no one is using.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. Again, like they're a solid enough defense, and you could see a spot here where it's just, I guess not the line is wrong because Detroit is favored, but I think where like the idea is wrong around this New Orleans side of things and at home, and they shouldn't be as big of an underdog. Detroit's a fraud. Like I've heard all these things all week long, right? And so that's kind of where my angle would be at there. I don't hate it at 3K, and they're right in between the pay up mid-range 3K and the pay down options that we just talked about.
I made Detroit my super lock on the spread show. I think they beat the shit out of New Orleans. Just everyone in the NFC South sucks, and people seem to forget this every single week.
What do you think Detroit has? Side topic here, because I had these debates with Hoop. He's from Michigan, obviously. What do you think of Detroit on the season? What's their best outcome here?
Losing in the NFC Championship game? Like the way that it would
That's their best, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Listen, they can win the Super Bowl. It's the NFL. Like, shit happens in the NFL. But to look at how all of this is going to play out, that probably Dallas, Philly, and San Francisco seem to be like a cut above. And I think that Philly and San Francisco, a little bit of a cut above Dallas, but Dallas is now closer to those teams than they are Detroit. Detroit's just on an island in the NFC as very clearly the fourth best team. And listen, every team goes through a rough patch throughout the course of the season. Detroit's looked really good in spots. And as I pointed out on the Best Bet show with Cam and Rob, that it's going to happen to Philly too, that sometimes you need to be punched in the mouth to take things seriously. And that finally happened to Detroit against Green Bay. Like, they kept getting away with playing C- football and still winning games. And if you keep doing that, then you're just going to play C- football. And it's no different than people in their regular work life, whatever it might be. If you can put in a minimum effort and it continues to work for you, what is going to be... Why do you need to get better? Why do you need to take it more seriously if it just works? And finally, it didn't work. And they played all these crappy teams, and it was super close, but they kept coming out on top. Then it didn't happen in a very visible spot on Thanksgiving against the Packers, a team that was inferior to them, and it was at home for them. I think they just get it right. Like, this is a good spot for them. It's like if Philly gets blown out by San Francisco this week, I think that's going to end up being good for Philly in the long run.
Yeah, I don't hate that call. I actually really like the Detroit call, the super lock you got there, because it's like what you said, the Mike Tyson thing, finally get punched in the mouth. That's what's going to happen, and that's what did happen. Jordan Love just dominating you on the holiday and everything that goes with it. I could see it for sure here. And again, how can we leverage that? We'll have to see. We talked about some of those running backs. We talked about Detroit defense now. You could pair that up together and avoid these New Orleans guys, and that could end up, Pat, also being big leverage if we do see a lot of these guys ruled out and people are heavy on one of the New Orleans or two of the New Orleans wide receivers based on injury stuff or Kamara, whatever it might end up being. So I actually don't hate that call, getting back on track with the Detroit defense as well, just in DFS.
The Omaha Steaks optimal lineup of the week. OmahaSteaks.com has 50% off site-wide right now. Code MAYO will get you an extra $30 off with a minimum purchase that will be required. But hey, you're sending some gifts for Christmas. It's the best thing to do. Honest to God, Tambo. Like, you got friends in the States, you send it to Hoop. You'd be like, hey, Hoop, here's a box full of meat. You think he might be a vegan for all I know. I don't know. But if he's not, I think Omaha Steaks.
Gonna be mad about a box full of meat. Yeah.
It sounds pretty good. And 50% off site-wide, and you don't have to leave your house. Like, that's where I get all the credit with all of this when people are like, hey, Pat got me, like, an expensive thing of steaks. A, it wasn't expensive because it was 50% off, and I used code MAYO to save an extra $30 off. The shipping goes straight to their door, and I didn't have to leave my house. And people actually like the gift. It's so hard to... Especially, like, we deal with a lot of remote people from, like, even around the world at this point. But, like, we're in Canada. We have a lot of friends in the States. You send them a Christmas gift. You know, we both run companies now that, you know, you send people out some Christmas gifts. It's a really good Christmas gift to get someone.
For sure. And there's nothing better than that. Like you said, for being able to do it from home, send it, they receive it at home. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I could go to the grocery store and look for these good steaks, but you're not even going to find a lot of them. And then on top of that, it just comes right to your door and you're good to go. So I can't say enough about it. Like you said, just being able to send gifts like that is perfect.
Yeah, I sent Kenny something as well. That should be arriving in the mail for him very soon. A sponsor that's going to be, maybe he'll be in this show. It's supposed to start December 1st, but I might move it up here. But I think that he's going to like it.
All right. I'm excited to hear about that. Maybe offline after. I want to know. I don't like waiting. So spoiler alerts.
I'll tell you. I'll give them a shout out in the show. It's lucy.co. It's a quitting smoking thing that's been really helping me. So I think it can really help him too. And anyone who wants to quit smoking, lucy.co. Go check that out. Code MAYO will get you some money off over there. And there's free shipping with that as well. So the optimal lineup has Tua in it right now. So it also has Zack Moss, because obviously that's the way that's going to work. So it's Tua at quarterback, Kamara and Zack Moss as the running backs, Juju, Tyreek, and Elijah Moore at wide receiver, Njoku at tight end, presuming he plays. And then you have Jalen Warren at flex, and then you have Falcons D coming in at $3,400. So a lot of the plays that we talked about, and these are the ones that are doing really well in the projections right now. I don't actually hate this lineup, and usually I do, because usually you get a very uncorrelated, no stack type of option with the optimal. But you know, with Tua, with Tyreek Hill, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's obvious. Yeah, it's definitely really good. And that's like, you and I were just talking pre-show. We were looking at it. I was trying to see what it was to get it plugged in over here because remote today. But just to look at it, like, you see those two Browns, and I think a lot of people say, well, what, you got two Browns in there? And it's like, well, they're kind of just PPR guys that are going to rack the points up on DraftKings. And you could say, well, let's see if Flacco starts and get him in, and what does that do for the lineup? Sure. But at the same time, you can also just say, well, what does Flacco do versus what does Tua with Tyreek do? That's kind of a whole different scenario. So just let those PPR points rack up and leave it as is with those guys. No Washington guys or anything like that. But again, big total, you can mix in some of those guys instead. I like it starting with Tua, though, in the spot.
So what we can do, let's adjust this and try to make it a Dolphin stack that we want to use. So let's take out Juju, Elijah Moore, Njoku, Jalen Warren, Falcons D. We'll leave in, we can even take out Kamara. We'll go Tua, Zack Moss, and Tyreek Hill to start this off. Do we want to add in any other Dolphins?
I don't know about another Dolphin as much as the Washington side, like to keep it going, to keep these guys out there and keep them sticking with it so that they can actually ceiling out.
All right. Do you want a cheap Washington guy? Do we want to go with Terry McLaurin? What do you think?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Who of the Washington wide receivers, or is it Logan Thomas time at 3,600 there in the mid-range at tight end? Because he can just rack up targets himself. He's actually less than the optimal version that had Njoku in it, and could just be a way to say, I'll use up a 1Z position on a guy that fits the game stack, right? Makes it into a 2-1. So I don't have a problem with him either.
See, I think that people are either going to use Logan Thomas or Curtis Samuel because of the discount that you get on those guys to make it really affordable to use the Dolphins players. I suppose I should ask you, do you like the Dolphins offense this week? Not
as much as some others. I think I like some of the cheaper options, and I also like going up to the top. I think that, again, we'll see how the Purdy stuff plays out, but Hurts on the opposite side of him just continues to do his thing. And then Stroud, people hate paying for Stroud now. Like, there's no way he can do it, right? I always talk about Best Buy pricing. He's way outside of that now. He's not 7,900. Even then, people were shook by that price tag. He's 8,100 now, though, a little bit more than Tua. And I actually don't mind him because it's at least how condensed it is. And it could get easier to stack Stroud this week, depending on the Schultz news. What happens there, right? Obviously questionable as of now.
And the Noah Brown news as well, whether or not that he's going to play. So
I think Brown does play. So I think that still, at least you still know the target tree, though. It's just the Schultz thing would definitely make it even easier. And by the way, Schultz wasn't even really involved last week. He just sticks to the same guys.
And sometimes it's Schultz that was the problem.
It was, yeah. I just mean, like, even last week it wasn't. So if he's out, it would make things a lot better for me. We'll know that stuff on Sunday, though, so we can save that one. I just think, like I said, out of the Tua side, on another site, Tua is much cheaper and easier to stack. On what we're talking about here, this is just the way it fits in this optimal. But again, you have Juju, Elijah Moore. I know we're off it now, but just to what you had up on the screen, you really were punting a lot of spots to make this work. I also think there's something to be said. What about last week where it was really expensive to stack Allen or Hurts with A.J. Brown and Stephon Diggs, or vice versa? In this case here, like last week, you saw Gabe Davis and Devontae Smith, the number twos, get away with it. Could you see like Waddle and Dotson of Washington, where it ends up being something like that? Or Curtis Samuel again. I'm just saying whoever you want to peg as the number two after who people think number one is Terry McLaurin.
It doesn't seem like people are going to McLaurin, though, is the thing.
Right.
And that's why I don't mind using him here. And to kind of hit it with you, I mean, the lineup that I won the money with last week was Hurts, A.J. Brown, and Devonta Smith. That was my stack.
Yeah. And okay. And then what about the other thing, though? I was just going to say, if you don't mind McLaurin, popped in my mind, what about the Hal side of this game? He's also what people perceive to be overpriced. But if everyone likes Tua, why not just get the opposite side of it? Because then you can go Howell, McLaurin, Thomas with Tyreek as the run back. And you should be pretty different there, I think, within the same game on top of, what the other side looks like, what we just talked about.
Say that again. Say the Washington side again. Howell with McLaurin and who?
And Thomas, because then you can still get away with then it really makes even more sense to punt the tight end spot off with Thomas because he literally fits the double stack, makes Tyreek affordable, but now you still have over 5,000 per spot, and you can get a cheaper defense or that mid-range defense in there. So you can build a little bit more of a floor upside type lineup here, it looks like, at least. You like Mostert there. Don't hate that. Finish out the game stack.
Yeah, we'll plug in
Lions D.
We'll plug in Lions D. That leaves us with 5,100 for a receiver and a flex. Do you think this is a pay down, pay up option, or do we look for something that's somewhat balanced in the $5,000 range?
What's another game that you want to target here? That's what I would say, because I think what are we missing right now that you liked? Detroit, you got Detroit because you're going that way with the Detroit D, so you're trying to kind of hope that game does a little less. What about the Houston-Denver spot now that we're not getting at? So what does that look like if you go? You mentioned Sutton earlier, right?
Yeah, but the problem is if we put it, I don't mind Sutton. And like when we build out Stroud, I think that we can do this pretty well. But if we use Cortland Sutton 54, we're now at $4,800 for a flex. I just don't see anyone there. It's George Pickens. Don't love that.
Yeah. No, how much? Yeah, you probably need to drop down at defense then and get to your Najee play at that point. But then you're leaving the Detroit New Orleans game completely alone. Also, we didn't talk yet, but San Francisco Philly, big total there, and you depends on how you see that going. But
yeah,
I kind of like that.
The problem is if you overload one of these games, if you overload this game, it's almost everyone is just so expensive from that other game that you can't fit them in.
Okay, so then there's two other things here. You can take Mostert out because we already have Tyreek. I mean, if he's at 9,300 or 9,600, sorry, going to hit his ceiling, that's going to affect a guy like Mostert getting into the box. Or, Pat, you could say, let's leave Tyreek out of this one. Let's use Mostert on the ground and go the double Moss, the Mostert and the Moss play and do that. And then let's see what we can do at wide receiver with the two wide receiver spots and a flex. You have a lot more money at that point if you flip it completely and then just see where it compares on the chart as far as the optimal score.
Oh, this works. So if we don't use Tyreek and we use Mostert, we can put in Ayuk and Devonta Smith as receivers. And then we still have $5,300 left for a flex, which can Yeah, I mean,
I think it's Najee, right?
I mean, this other T Hill, I think that might be Taysom, but maybe they won't notice, and maybe we can have Tyreek for 5,200. That would be nice. But if not, we can play Taysom Hill or Najee Harris. Those would be my two favorite guys.
I think just Najee's who you liked. It is about 10 points off of the optimal.
I can see that.
It again, I think that's kind of what you get here. What was the? Whoops. Actually, no, I lied. The problem with doing this from home sometimes. Wide receiver. It is 6 points off from the optimal.
Okay.
I had different. I just clicked Devonta real quick and DEV, and I had Parker up in there for whatever reason, but it's fixed now. It's got Smith in there, and it's only about 6 points off from the original optimal.
I like that the difference between Devontae Parker and Devonta Smith is 4 points.
Seems about right. If it's going to be Bailey Zappi starting for New England here, it's what they announced, I think, this morning. So we'll see. But I kind of like the setup you put there because you still get, like, main thing is, what do you get here? You get the 3-1 in the Washington-Miami game. You get a secondary stack in the San Francisco-Philly game, and it's a late hammer, and it's two pretty nice spots, Ayuk and Smith. I like it. You get Detroit-New Orleans, where it's very tough to figure out either side of that game without taking a bunch of chances. Like we said, so you say, forget it. I'm just going to play the defense there. And then you get Zack Moss, who's the value play of the slate. It lands on your guy, Najee, who now he's your guy. But I'm just saying, you get what I'm saying. You can mix and match other spots here, but I don't hate that. Do you have any take on Debo versus Ayuk this one?
I just always side with Ayuk.
I do too, but I was just going to say, if you wanted to avoid the Najee thing, which some probably do. Let's just see it here. You can swap.
You can do this pretty easily. You can go Lions D to Patriots D.
I found it.
And then you can go Harris to Javonte Williams. $100 more, you can get Stevenson in there.
I found just the quick swap on the other one that was 1 point off the optimal, and it's a really nice lineup. It was just as simply as taking Ayuk down to Debo, Rashad White up to, who's the other guy we just had in there? Oh, Najee Harris up to Rashad White. Done. 1 point off the optimal.
So Rashad White into, so it's
the
just
Najee spot,
and
Ayuk down to Debo.
I don't mind that. If we go back to the flex for a second, and we don't have enough money. All right, never mind. I was going to say, can we turn Rashad White into David Montgomery? But we cannot. So we're not going to do that.
Need a couple $100. But yeah, either way, I mean, just good to see that. But like, this lineup is pretty nice, I think. It's Howell, McLaurin, Thomas. You got Mostert to speed it up on the other side and hope they get their points on the ground off of the Tua to Tyreek's, or instead of Tyreek, I'm going to say it's going to be Waddle week. Like, people do that all the time, and then it just ends up being Tyreek. But could be the same thing here. But then you get Zack Moss value play, Debo, who is not only a fine play at 6,200, but if people are on CMC, you have neither CMC or Tyreek Hill. You have Mostert and Debo instead. Devontae Smith on the other side, Rashad White, who looks like a great play, and Detroit D in the game we don't know much. This really does, to me, capitalizes on a lot of the good spots on the slate pad. So I don't hate that lineup at all.
And you still get to use Zack Moss to save the money.
And it's got to be different, even with Zack Moss. Like, that, it just seems pretty different across the board, and you're still hitting the spots people are wanting to get after. So I like this build.
All right, let's go on to Purdy and Hurts.
Which side do you like more?
I like Hurts more.
I think I do. It's really tough, though. Purdy does pop, though, in some of the projection stuff. So I wonder if people will talk their way onto this and be able to do it there. I'm just not sure how it all ends up shaking out. But I like the fact that Hurts is also just a little bit more than Tua. So how do you do that differently? And then you build it out. I don't think what you're about to try and do is possible. It's possible. I guess anything's possible, but I don't think that's gonna work out.
I'll make this work. This is easy stuff. So Hurts, Brown, Smith with McCaffrey. So we throw some Lions D in there, and then we get Cade Otton in there, who's my favorite of the pay down. Actually, you know what? Not even Lions D. We'll go Patriots D with this one. Patriots D for $2,400. Okay, we're back up to $3,700 right now. Who are some of the? We need to have Zack Moss in this lineup, obviously, because he's the best of the low-priced running backs. Now we have a wide receiver and a flex, $3,250.
It's Terry and Juju.
It's who?
Juju and Terry will fit. Terry and Juju will fit if it ends up you getting the slate breaks your way.
There it is. Done.
I wasn't even going to plug it in and entertain you on this, but now I actually am curious just to see. So it was Moss. It was who's the other running back after Moss? I know the rest.
There was no other. It was Christian McCaffrey.
Oh, CMC. Yeah, literally insane. All right, one sec here. I'll get the rest. Brown, Devontae. That's crazy that you made that fit, but it's funny because we only really made it fit because it's like dudes we talked about on the, that it kind of makes sense from that perspective. But yeah, it's tough to see. Juju. And like, we need Douglas out. We need Olave, at least Shaheed out, hopefully, and we're good there. Otton, though, I don't mind, and he's kind of leveraged to the Rachaad White play that we don't have. And then the defense, you ended up going down to the Patriots, which is New England. And that leaves me with the money for Terry at 3,300. This lineup projects for, wow, it's actually not too bad.
Really?
For some reason, it's not popping up. Let's see here. It is 5.5 points off the optimal.
Okay, so let's try this. Let's take McCaffrey out. And we'll take Juju out. And we'll take Perry out and try to finagle this a different way. We'll leave in the core of Hurts, Moss, both Eagles receivers, Cade Otton, and Patriots D for those savings. Let's just say it's not McCaffrey, it's Ayuk that we want to use instead. So we immediately open up like $2,000 in this lineup. So if we can use another cheap flex, we can get back into that bottom tier of running back if we want to. Or we can just kind of hang out in this like middle region here. So who is the best of, is it Najee Harris was kind of the best of the, besides Zack Moss, was the best of the cheaper running backs. We have a flex for $3,100 if we use Najee Harris. Is there a $3,100 tight end or receiver that's not the absolute nut low?
No, there's no way. Like, it's, I keep looking at here, at least on my stuff. But I think the other angle is you could have went with, instead of CMC and I guess Juju that you had in there, like you can go Ramondre Stevenson paired with the New England D. You can get Debo in, and it still keeps Terry at 3,300 in the mix. It projects about the same.
So Debo, yeah, $3,300 is what you.
So you
end
keep
up with.
Terry in, but you have Brown, Debo, Devontae. You end up getting Ramondre Stevenson paired with the New England D in a pretty good spot. Matchup's fine. Little bit of a okay spot there without Juju because now you're upgrading that. But it's just Debo instead of CMC, Ramondre instead of Juju. That's really what you're looking at. Like what side would you like of that? That's a 2v2. It's interesting. It's the same fit, right?
I think I just like having McCaffrey better. If I'm going to overload that game, and I don't have Brock Purdy, I want the guy who might just take away all the points from all of the San Francisco receivers.
That is crazy. We've been looking at these 2v2s the last couple of weeks, and we just found it again. So CMC Juju is the exact same price as Ramondre and Debo. Same spots, flipping the positions within the same game, same teams. And so it's exact 2v2. There's one to think about in your single entries and stuff as we see ownership as it gets closer to Sunday. I'll make a little note of that because I like ones like that where you can kind of compare. So again, we'll wait on the Douglas news. You think he could be out? I think that's at least somewhat interesting. And then it's Debo Ram.
So let's just try a Purdy one very quickly to see how much easier it is to build this way. So who do we put him with? Purdy.
Well, I think then it's fine to do what you want. Like I like Ayuk and Debo then at that point.
See, I think I would want to see if I could play Ayuk and CMC.
It's too much.
Is it too much?
I don't know. It's probably not.
We just built out a more expensive version of this.
It's definitely possible. It makes sense. I just say like I would like to leverage that more, but yeah, let's do it. CMC and Ayuk.
So CMC, Ayuk, Purdy, Devonta Smith. Put those four in. And again, I like paying down with Otton. And we'll throw Lions D in for the moment to see what we got working with. Obviously, Zack Moss ends up in this. So now we're at, for a wide receiver and flex, we're at $4,800. So we could do Perry and Stevenson probably again. Perry, and we have 6,300. We could actually get Rachaad White if we wanted to.
Zack Moss, Detroit D.
Now we do have 2 Tampa Bay guys. If this is probably not the best solution to it.
That's the one we talked about earlier, though. I said that exact one, like Rashad White doing the work and Cade Otton just picking up some catches,
or
more than fine.
We could just throw in DeAndre Hopkins into our flex to pair him with Zack Moss.
So you take Rashad White out, go back there. Let's get a little secondary stack going. Don't hate that. Is that how much he is? 6,300?
6,100. So you have $200 left over. You don't have to do it that way, obviously. You can. I got
a different angle though. You could do.
Here's what you could do. You could do Stevenson as one of the flex, and you can move the Lions up to the Colts if you wanted to, and then you could pair the Colts D with Zack Moss.
This is probably going to just become popular by the end of the week because it works so well. But just to show you again on that exact build, if you just take Ayuk to Debo, you now get Mostert in the flex because you kind of want a piece of that game, right? You're hoping it doesn't pop off. It projects equal to the optimal. So it's the Purdy, McCaffrey, Moss like you have. It is Terry and then Devontae with Debo. Cade Otton, no White anymore. Detroit to go against that other side, and you still get your Miami-Washington piece by saying it's going to be Mostert on the ground.
It's not the world's worst lineup, which is nice to see.
It can make sense. I mean, obviously, you also have a small play going against your defense, but who cares at $3,300? That means nothing. So I'm fine with that. I think that's like an example just to see it again, but it does seem like that's going to be the more popular route. I guess what I'm noticing is that like the running back situation is looking very stars and scrubsy. Like it's always going to be that way. Like Moss with CMC or Moss with Mostert and somebody else expensive like Kamara. Like you could get all those guys in the Henry, Gibbs, Bijan, Swift, Montgomery, Breece Hall, White. White's going to be the popular one, but Stevenson, like that range is loaded full of guys that you could just avoid. I mean, you might even be able to avoid the Moss stuff here if you wanted to. Like, again, you could just play Minshew stacks with these mid-range guys and just leverage that way. So I think this is a fun slate for that reason.
All right, let's do Minshew then.
Let's do Minshew.
Minshew with no Moss. So Minshew, Pittman Downs.
Yeah, do that for now. But I will note, like you said, you can do them with Moss. It's a way to get different because maybe some people won't. I think most people would prefer to leverage as opposed to play them both together. But I'm just, like I said, fine with doing it this way just to see what it looks like. So if we go him with Downs went up a little bit this week too, right? He went up to 5,100. Okay. Yeah, so do you like Hopkins or Henry?
I like Hopkins.
So let's do that. And the one thing you and I talk about all the time and we like about this is that's just burying all your wide receiver slots on this game.
If you want to get crazy, take out DeAndre Hopkins and play Kyle Phillips. Because it looks like Traylon's limited in practice. I don't think that he's going to play. And Phillips has been, he was bad last week. Everyone was bad last week.
I thought I saw this morning that Burks was actually trending to play.
Okay, so let's take him out then. So we'll go Hopkins.
Returns to practice for the first time since concussion. So he's already back at practice, from yesterday. So I got to think that there's a chance he plays. Let's go back to Hopkins. You liked him earlier anyway.
Yep.
But you know what? This is going to be like a balanced build. Because let's just put Detroit and Otton in just to stick to what we've been doing for the sake of it.
I mean, or this is one if we do want to actually get somewhat balanced.
You got 6,700. You've got 6,700 per running back.
What if I just throw in Taysom Hill at tight end instead at 5,200 instead of Cade Otton? Yeah.
You can.
Although it's going against my defense now, so that's probably not the right move.
I think just for the sake of ease, like, again, let's see what the difference is and what we already did. Let's go to Otton in Detroit.
So we can
now you have 6,700 for two running backs and a flex, but that's where I'm saying now you can get away with all these options. Like you could pair it with David Montgomery. You could put in Bijan.
I got it.
Moss.
I got it. McCaffrey, Najee, Stevenson.
There you go. McCaffrey, Stevenson, who we like, and Najee is 52. Yeah. This is 1 point better than again, we're using different projection sets, but I'm saying this actually projects better than the optimal.
Interesting. Okay.
No Moss,
but the passing side of that game.
Yeah, who I guess the other angle too would be like we could quickly try this, but I'm going to take out Najee and Downs just to see how much more it projects for, because I know it's going to project better.
With Moss
and get Zack Moss in. It leaves you 5,700. It's like, it's not really the best area, but just trying to think here.
for wide receiver at that range.
Yeah,
You can get McLaurin in to get some piece of that game. You can get Cortland Sutton in, who I do like.
Yeah, either or projects like 3.5 points to 4 points better than the original optimal. So just to show that kind of could be the angle as well. Go with Minshew with Zack Moss and Pittman. Take all the checkdowns and the targets. We've got Hopkins on the other side. That could be really whatever you wanted. Like that could also be, Godwin or whatever in the same build if you use Sutton. So I'm just messing around with it, but there's other ways that you can go about it. You don't have to run it back either. We just did in this case, but I don't hate these builds. I guess, the way to get a piece of it was with McLaurin.
I want to build one more, and it's Goff before we take off. So I want to do Goofy J.
Goff before we take off. Look at that wordplay.
See if we can just do St. Brown. Do we want to throw Laporta in here? Because Laporta leaves us an interesting case. We can either go Perry for cheap, Kamara for expensive, or just do double tight end with Taysom Hill and Laporta. Or just do mini. Goff, St. Brown, Taysom Hill.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, that actually is different because then you're going the opposite side. And I said this one on the first look show too, is like Laporta looks good. It's a good spot, but wouldn't it be the fitting tilt of the week where it's like the opposite side tight end in the same game that just happens to be Taysom Hill, who's like the most tilting person on the planet. So that would make sense for me. Yes.
Yeah. And that way we can use, let's say Colts D, because we can use Colts D and Zack Moss to kind of squeeze everything in here. We're back up to 5,500. We didn't get the punt tight end in, so we're not going to save the money in that circumstance. Do we want to use one of the punt wide receivers? I mean, I was big on Dortch last week. He ended up catching the touchdown and getting there, but he's still only $3,700. Well, he's not expensive.
Yeah, he's been involved. He's definitely been involved.
He's getting like double digit. Whenever Michael Wilson is out, he's getting like double digit targets. He just kind of sucks. So whatever.
One thing I will say about that, again, just from a pure people watching, wondering, and roster construction standpoint, is like we're already on Goff and St. Brown and Taysom Hill. Like you can also just plug in whatever chalk you want at this point and get away with it too. So you don't have to go.
I know. I'm just thinking like between the pay down wide receiver option, I'm just trying to free up a little bit more money. We could always go to Patriots D from Colts D as well, or one of the cheaper defenses. The whole point being that I don't like Juju. The projections like Juju. They like him every fucking week, and he sucks. Perry, yeah. I don't know. You could throw him into this and have two Saints, but like Perry might absolutely reek as well. That at least I know Dortch is, if Michael Wilson is out, and Hollywood hasn't been practicing, he's probably going to play. But if Michael Wilson sits and you have Dortch sitting there, and just lock him in for 8 targets. He might only catch 2 of them, but I know that he's going to be involved in a game where they're 6-point dogs.
Yeah, I get it. That's obviously the fear of like, if you don't like a guy and you're like, I'm off him, it's fine. And if you have no fear of being off him because there's reasons you don't like him, then it's fine to do. Just making sure people know, like, I'd have no problem if you just go to somebody here that's more chalk. But interesting roundout, Pat, was Mostert, Terry McLaurin, and Jerome Ford for some of the guys that we've mentioned. You get a piece of that game with Mostert and McLaurin, and then you get your guy Jerome Ford, rounds that lineup out as a way you could go about it. It's like 10 points off your original optimal, but it will be because of some of these dudes.
Or instead of using Jerome Ford, we use Jalen Warren to counter Greg Dortch.
Yeah, definitely another way to go about it for sure.
All right. Don't mind that at all. That will do it on the Pat Mayo Experience. Play in the Listeners League. Smash like and sub to the channel. Code MAYO at shippingnation.com will get you 10% off. And what do you guys got going on the rest of the week?
Yeah, lots going on right now. Biggest time of the year for us is going to be NFL, but of course right now with NBA, NHL, other sports going on, a lot of great people in the Discord. The process, we're giving away the free Showdown mini course on the site. So if you go to shippitnation.com and sign up, use promo code MAYO. But if you don't sign up today, that's okay. You can just put your email in the box and you'll get the free 45-minute Showdown mini course that Hoop and I recorded at the start of the season.
Awesome. All right. You can follow me at the PME on Twitter. Once again, playing that Listeners League, and runthesims.com for your optimization, your simulations. Code Mayo will get you 10% off, but I just use it for the prop sniper, and I keep printing cash on same-game parlays. Will that end? Probably, but hey, might as well ride it while it's hot, right? Runthesims.com, the prop sniper, okay? Subject to the newsletter as well, because I always put some interesting info into those, and it's completely free. You can find all of this down in the description right now. I'm Pat Mayo. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
Mayo experience! Experience!